In Miami, a university football player and his female friend are found beaten to death. Investigators piece together random fragments from the crime scene, hoping to assemble evidence that will point to the killer. A man is found shot to death in his living room. With no obvious suspect, investigators turn to those closest to the victim and uncover a startling secret. When killers are driven by jealousy and desire, their desperation is evident in both the crime and their efforts to avoid detection. But forensic science can reveal even the slightest mistake. To solve crimes of passion. Sultry Miami Beach, with its hot nights and warm days, is the perfect setting for romance. But when passion is one-sided, jealousy and rage can lead to murder. On April 16, 1996, University of Miami student Darren Thomas was returning to the dormitory he shared with star linebacker Marlon Barnes. Thomas saw that the tires of his SUV were flat. He had just loaned the car to his roommate. Annoyed, he wanted to confront him. When he went into the dorm, Thomas was horrified to find Barnes lying on the floor, covered in blood. He ran next door to call police.
Miami-Dade County Police and Fire, where's your emergency? University of Miami? What building number? Room number?
A patrol officer and an ambulance were immediately dispatched to the apartment.
Attention all units, 332, University of Miami Athletic Dorm. There's a subject on the scene at 1901, Kilo 3105.
Paramedics entered the scene. Marlon Barnes lay motionless on the floor. He'd been severely beaten about the head and face. He was pronounced dead at the scene. In the bedroom, the officer found another victim.
There's a female down, detectives.
A young woman, also badly beaten. Despite efforts to revive her, the victim's vital signs remained weak. Medics needed to get her to a hospital immediately. Crime scene investigators arrived and began to carefully search through the apartment, looking for clues. It was eerily undisturbed, suggesting that robbery was not a motive for the attack. Investigators found splinters of wood and shards of metal near the front door. But the wood pieces did not seem to match any of the furniture in the apartment. It may have come from the murder weapon. They also found fragments of teeth and bone, testaments to the savagery of the attacks. Investigators interviewed Darren Thomas. He identified the female victim as 22-year-old Timwanika Lumpkins. Unfortunately, she too would not survive. Barnes had borrowed his SUV to attend a party at a Miami nightclub. He was not aware of anyone who would want to attack Barnes or Timwanika. At the Miami-Dade Police Department, Detective Thomas Romani worked the case. From his early assessment of the crime scene, Romani knew the victims were caught by surprise.
We were able to establish that the attack was with a heavy blunt object, and it took place right at the front door and proceeded into the house, and the majority of the trauma sustained to Barnes occurred when he was on the floor.
The victims were autopsied in Dade County. The examination revealed that both victims died as a result of blunt trauma. Barnes and Timwanika had been hit with such force that impressions of the murder weapon were left on their bodies. Medical examiner Sam Galino noted the distinctive nature of the victim's wounds.
Marlon's wounds were predominantly clustered around his face. Some of them were T-shaped or L-shaped, or had some unusual contours to them that made me think that they were made with some sort of very specific weapon. Timwanika had some pattern injuries, but they were subtle and they were different, indicating that either it was a different weapon, a different aspect of the same weapon, or possibly that the weapon had somehow altered, such as being broken between when she was assaulted and when Marlon was assaulted. But the bigger mystery in both of the cases was there a specific weapon that we could identify and match to these wounds?
The task of identifying the murder weapon would fall to the Miami-Dade Crime Lab. Thomas Quirk is a firearms and tool mark examiner at the lab. He studied evidence taken from the scene.
I could tell by looking at the wood that it looked like what's called a forend of a shotgun. That is a part of the shotgun that's usually held by the left hand when somebody's firing a shotgun.
The brutality and rage of the crime suggested the killer knew his victims. The next day, news of the campus tragedy stunned the city. Detectives would have to develop leads on a suspect. Investigators met with the victim's close friends and teammates. Barnes and Timwanika were popular and well-liked by their peers.
I saw him at the Club Salvations.
The football players told us that Barnes and Timwanika were seen together. Not all of the football players knew their exact relationship. Timwanika was a friend of Marlon Barnes since they were in high school.
Miami-Dade police also discovered that Timwanika had an ex-boyfriend, a rap musician named LeBrant Dennis.
LeBrant Dennis was a local of Miami. He had produced some rap videos, and in fact, that's how Timwanika and LeBrant Dennis met.
Police were eager to question Timwanika's ex-boyfriend, LeBrant Dennis. And they wouldn't have to wait long for answers. The day after the murder, Dennis and a friend showed up at the police station.
And her boyfriend. I need you to research through that, see what you can make out of it.
The ex-boyfriend of the girl was murdered, LeBron, he's outside, he wants to talk to you.
Oh, good, very good. Okay. You come out there with us. Very good.
Detective Romani was intrigued by what he found out.
When I met with him, he didn't have that gangster, rough rap type persona, and I didn't pick up on it. LeBron was very calm. He was inquisitive as to what occurred. He told me that he didn't have any information about the case. Had you ever had any problems in your relationship with Tanganyika, domestic problems? He gave me some background information about his relationship with Tanganyika, why they broke up. He, in fact, told me that he did not personally know Marlon Barnes. Had you and Tanganyika
Dennis and Tanganyika dated for 5 years.
Up until a week ago, we moved out of our
There had been some breakups between them through their 5-year relationship as well.
But according to Dennis, things were getting better between them.
Out of your cousin's house?
Yeah.
They were in the process of reconciling.
We're in the same place. I've seen pictures of it and stuff like
He said he was asleep at his sister's house the night of the murders. Investigators asked to take photographs of his body. Police wanted to see if Dennis had any marks or scratches, signs of a physical altercation.
Palms, yes. Thank you. Can you take off your shirt, please?
But no visible scratches or bruises were found on his body. Dennis also agreed to be fingerprinted. He was acting like a man with nothing to hide. Even though there was nothing glaring, Detective Romani wasn't convinced.
When I was told that LeBron Dennis responded to the Homicide Bureau to speak to me, I wasn't really surprised, but I was apprehensive. Maybe that he was coming forward to be too helpful. It became clear that he was trying to be very helpful.
Miami-Dade investigators went to Dennis's home. He continued to cooperate. They conducted a thorough search.
We're going to ask that you wait by the door here, okay? We're going to just look in your room.
Looking for anything that might be related to the crime. They found nothing out of the ordinary. Detectives asked Dennis for the clothes he had worn the previous night. The clothes would be examined for traces of blood or hair and fiber evidence, but nothing would be found. They also searched and photographed Dennis's car. But again found nothing suspicious. Despite the lack of evidence, police could not eliminate him as a suspect. Detectives had to expand their search if they were to solve the double murders, and they would need hard evidence to bring the killer to justice. Detectives were struggling to solve the brutal murders of University of Miami football player Marlon Barnes and his friend Tanganyika Lumpkins. Police considered Tanganyika's ex-boyfriend, LeBron Dennis, a potential suspect, but there was no evidence to link him to the crime. Investigators went to the area outside the nightclub where the victims were last seen. At a 24-hour gas station, a clerk had seen a suspicious man wearing a hooded sweatshirt, pacing back and forth, watching the club across the street. All of this took place at the same time Barnes and Tanganyika were inside the club partying. The clerk was concerned and called police. By the time they arrived, the man had gotten in a car and left. The clerk said she did not see his face. She gave a precise description of his car, recalling every detail, including the make and model, its tinted windows, and a missing rear license plate. Investigators showed the woman photos of LeBron Dennis's car. She didn't recognize it and was certain about what she had seen. Police needed to locate the car and its driver. They looked further into the background of Timwanika, trying to find a lead to someone who may have wanted to harm her. They interviewed a number of her friends.
It wasn't a mutual thing at all. She wanted to...
Detective Thomas Romani discovered that Timwanika's relationship with LeBrant Dennis had been fraught with violence and stalking, a far cry from the mutual breakup that Dennis had described.
It was a very controlling relationship.
And as we spoke to more friends and acquaintances, we learned that Timwanika and LeBrant Dennis had an argument early in the week, and she had left him. There had been some violent breakups and domestic violence between them.
Dennis said he was asleep at his sister's home when the murders occurred. Now, detectives weren't convinced. They obtained Dennis's cell phone records. On the morning before the murders, he'd made a call to a man named Stuart Dillard. Investigators were anxious to speak with him.
Hello, we're detectives with the Miami-Dade Police Department. We'd appreciate your cooperation.
They met with Stuart. He was extremely nervous. He, of course, saw the murder on the news, and he was able to put it together that he lent this sawed-off shotgun to LeBrant Dennis, and he suspected that the sawed-off shotgun was possibly used in some criminal act.
Stuart Dillard said that on April 14th, one day after the murders, Dennis called him again and told him where to retrieve his shotgun and duffel bag. Inside, Stuart found a large folding knife that was not his, and several articles of clothing. When he looked at his shotgun, Stuart noticed that the wooden forend was missing.
He became very afraid of what had happened. He put some things together in his mind, and he thought that he would be culpable or somehow involved.
Stuart told investigators he disposed of the clothing in a dumpster and had thrown the knife and shotgun down a storm drain. All he kept was the duffel bag. Investigators took possession of it, hoping they could tie it directly to LeBrant Dennis.
When we first started speaking to Stuart, we were apprehensive about what he was telling us because he did admit that he lent a potential murder weapon to LeBrant Dennis. So we did investigate thoroughly what he had to tell us, and we believe what he was telling us was the truth, that he unknowingly lent this firearm to LeBrant Dennis.
Dad, it's a knife.
Miami-Dade police went to the storm drain and found the discarded weapons, exactly where Stuart said they would be.
Water. Anything else you see down there?
They retrieved the knife and the shotgun.
And that's what we're looking for.
I'm gonna go back down and see if there's anything else.
The weapons were bagged for analysis. Armed with this new evidence, the investigation of LeBrant Dennis intensified. Police interviewed his known acquaintances. Jamie Moyer was a former girlfriend.
Good, how you doing? Is this your car?
She admitted that she often loaned her car to Dennis.
Violations. Do you mind if I take a few photos?
Police saw that her car resembled the suspicious vehicle seen on the night of the murders. An officer photographed the car. The vehicle had no rear license plate, like the vehicle described by the clerk at the gas station. Investigators re-interviewed the gas station clerk.
We showed the photographs of her car to the clerk, and she positively identified that as being the same car she saw on that evening.
Police had established another connection between LeBrant Dennis and the car,
No doubt about it.
but it was highly circumstantial. To link him to the murders, they turned to the forensic evidence. They were confident that the bag had been used to carry the murder weapons. The duffel bag turned over by Dennis's friend Stewart was examined by criminalist Toby Wolson. Wolson found what appeared to be droplets of dried blood inside the bag.
I was asked to do the DNA interpretation of samples taken from a duffel bag, and we did analysis of those and compared those samples to the standards from the victim and the subject.
Wolson found a match between the blood in the duffel bag and the blood of one of the victims.
The DNA profiles obtained from the samples from the bag match the DNA profiles obtained from Marlon Barnes' bloodstain standard, which means that those samples came from Marlon Barnes.
Piece by piece, Miami authorities were building their case against LeBrant Dennis. Criminalists had evidence connecting Dennis's gym bag to one of the victims, but it would take more than a bloodstain to charge LeBrant Dennis with murder. The murders of University of Miami student Marlon Barnes and his childhood friend Tim Wanika Lumpkins were close to being solved. A wealth of evidence, including a knife and a shotgun, had been discovered. But so far, nothing tied the gruesome double murder directly to ex-boyfriend LeBrant Dennis. Miami-Dade criminalist Thomas Quirk examined the flat tire from the car Barnes had driven the night before he was killed.
I noted that the tire had a very curious V-shaped mark. Once I received the knife and examined the knife, I realized that the tip of the knife was bent and it was very dull. If this was a knife that made the marks, my job would be now to stab the tire with that knife and see if I could reproduce those V-shaped marks.
Quirk analyzed the test cuts against the punctures from the night of the crime. He found the two sets of punctures to be wholly consistent, concluding that Dennis's knife was used to slash the victim's tires. Quirk also examined the shotgun found in the storm drain. He compared wood splinters collected at the crime scene to the now bare forend of the shotgun.
It's no different than building an airplane or building a model car. You take the pieces, you look at them, you notice the fracture patterns to them, the manufacturer's markings, and you simply place them together and make a little mold out of it. And we found that once we did that, it fit perfectly into the frame of the shotgun. Chances are that this shotgun was used to bludgeon the two victims to death.
In addition to the wood splinters, they also collected metal fragments at the crime scene. Criminalist George Borghi examined the fragments.
At the time that the pieces of metal were found, they were unknown in terms of what the origin was. When the shotgun was recovered and they put all the pieces together, it was obvious from my perspective that it was a broken trigger guard, and the two pieces of metal looked like they could be fragments of metal from the trigger guard themselves.
But to prove an exact match between the metal fragments and the trigger guard would require more than the appearance of a close fit.
The molecular structure and the atomic structure of the metal particles are what give it the unique fracture pattern. Not only are the edges compared to show that the edges line up perfectly, in this situation it's a three-dimensional fracture. So besides the edges comparing favorably, the interior fractures compared favorably, meaning that every contoured edge of one piece fit within the contours of the adjoining piece and of the shotgun. So therefore, a combination of all those characteristics exclude the possibility that those trigger guard pieces came from any other weapon besides that one.
With this evidence, investigators now had probable cause. They charged LeBrant Dennis with the murders of Tim Wanika Lumpkins and Marlon Barnes. But to prove his guilt, police needed direct physical evidence. They once again turned to medical examiner Dr. Sam Galino. Galino had previously noted peculiar L and T-shaped wounds sustained by the victims. Galino compared the evidence to diagrams of the victims' injuries.
And we were able to compare different aspects of the shotgun to the wounds, and indeed found out that different aspects of this shotgun matched to a great degree of certainty the wounds that were on both of the bodies. I was able to conclude that this shotgun had been used to beat both Marlon Barnes and Tim Wanika Lumpkins.
LeBrant Dennis continued to profess his innocence, despite the strong case against him. But Miami-Dade investigators had amassed a wealth of evidence supporting his guilt, and it had all started with a case of envy.
From the evidence that we were able to establish in this investigation, LeBrant Dennis became extremely upset when he had found out that Tim Wanika Lumpkins went to meet Marlon Barnes at this event that hosted many celebrity football players from the NFL and college.
Investigators were convinced that LeBrant Dennis followed the victims to Marlon Barnes' apartment. When Barnes opened the door, Dennis struck him across the face. When Dennis finished attacking Barnes, he went after Tim Wanika. LeBrant Dennis was tried and convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. LeBrant Dennis's violent relationship with Tim Wanika Lumpkins led police to closely investigate him and ultimately solve the crime. But in some cases, there is no obvious suspect. Fresno, California is a quiet, peaceful city, known for its proximity to 3 national parks. On Friday, February 18, 2000, Nancy and Ralph Gower were making plans for the upcoming weekend.
Yeah, let's do lunch, sure.
Nancy was going to drive to their vacation home that evening.
So you're going to be real busy.
Ralph, who worked as an auto salesman, had to be at the dealership the following morning, but planned to drive up Saturday afternoon. The Gowers had been married for 12 years.
I'll be nice, Will. Okay.
I can't wait.
Thanks. Be nice.
Let's go.
That night, Nancy drove alone to their vacation house. The next morning, Ralph failed to show up for work. His concerned employer went to his house to check on him. But when she peered through the window, she saw him lying on the floor. Panicked, she tried to get Ralph's attention, but he wasn't moving. She called 911. Fresno police detectives Darrell Green and Al Murrieta responded. An emergency response team had already forced entry into the residence and pronounced the victim dead at the scene.
Take that side off. There it is.
2 bullet wounds marked the right side of his chest, but there were no shell casings present. The area immediately around the body seemed unusually clean, but detectives noted a small amount of blood under the sofa, perhaps overlooked by the killer.
Unless he was laying here originally.
Notice some of that dust here. Looks like something's been either moved or there's some broken stuff underneath the table.
Something's not right, or the couch has been moved.
It appeared the furniture had been moved.
What initially stood out to the investigators is that we could tell that the couch had been moved and that the scene was extremely clean, indicating that someone had cleaned up the crime scene and moved furniture after the victim had been shot.
Crime scene investigators took photographs and meticulously dusted surfaces for fingerprints. Broken items on the coffee table suggested a struggle had taken place. In the entryway, investigators found a gym bag. Inside the bag was a loaded revolver.
And book it. Provide us with a serial number on your property sheet so we can check it so we can get downtown. I can see if we can officer. Okay. Tell one more thing to check.
Detectives searched the house for signs of a break-in. There were none. The automatic garage door mechanism had been shut off.
It's disengaged from the lock there.
The door could now be opened by hand.
Remove. It's at the bottom. Totally correct. Find anything over here? No, I just checked that first drawer. I don't know what's in that bag. I haven't checked it. Kind of heavy.
Oh, goodness.
You want to turn these over to Mickey?
The detectives found more weapons in the garage. The assortment of firearms, along with the revolver found in the house, would be sent to a lab for ballistics tests.
Select this for now.
Detective Murrieta needed to contact the victim's wife.
I'm formulating questions in my mind. First of all, establishing where was she at the time that we believe the murder actually took place, who could alibi for her, and one other striking thing that I needed to clear up, who else had keys to that residence?
While the Fresno police pursued the investigation, Ralph Gower's body was autopsied. The pathologist would make further curious findings. Cause of death was attributed to the 2 bullet wounds to the chest. But pathologist Vinu Gopal noted something more.
At the autopsy, I found evidence of blunt trauma and gunshot wounds to the chest and injuries to the wrist. These injuries were consistent with handcuff injuries.
It appeared that Ralph Gower had been shackled to something before he was shot.
So we have handcuff injuries and somebody's laying on his back. Next thing you always think of, is it some sort of an execution style killing?
Police reached Nancy Gower and informed her of her husband's death.
Detective Maria from earlier.
She was shaken by the news and cooperated with the investigation.
A few things, just clarify on time. Can you tell me where you were Friday night?
The last time she saw her husband was the previous evening, just before she left for the vacation home.
You went back to work and I headed up to the cabin.
She expected Ralph to join her after he finished work, but he never showed up.
Oh, I don't know. I guess I was around.
Detective Green got a sense of Nancy and Ralph's marriage.
What we found was they were the all-American couple, and from talking to people who worked with both Nancy and Ralph, they were well-liked, and they seemed to be madly in love with each other.
Chance on that? Nancy, we're going to be needing to talk again, and we'll update you as we get the information. We're still in the early process of the investigation. Okay? Thank you. Thank you.
Everything that could potentially be a reason for the homicide was discredited, including any financial problems, any problems at work, anything that she thought could have been related, we were able to discredit.
The guns found at the crime scene were sent to the Fresno Crime Lab for testing. Criminalist Iqbal Sikhan tested bullets fired from the gun and compared them against the slugs retrieved from the victim. There were no matches, but characteristics of the slugs led Sikhan to the first clue of the killer's identity. He or she had used a .40 caliber firearm. But as the days passed, investigators had yet to develop a motive or suspect.
Remember the hand marks we had on here? Yeah, we were going to take them down and have them fingerprint.
They felt they had only one place to turn.
Get a hold of all the guys that are involved in this and let's meet.
We felt our only option was to bring Nancy in and go deeper into their personal life, including giving her a polygraph to verify some of her earlier statements.
Nancy Gower had cooperated through the entire investigation of her husband's murder.
No motive for the murder. And we need to eliminate you as a suspect, and once we do that...
But to investigators, it seemed as if she had something to hide. In Fresno, California, police were investigating the murder of luxury auto salesman Ralph Gower. With no leads in the case, they asked Gower's wife, Nancy, to take a polygraph exam. She agreed, but just as the test was to begin, she wouldn't continue.
We've got a little bit of a problem. She doesn't want to take the test until she talks to both of you.
She asked to speak with the investigators.
Hi.
I understand you wanted to talk to us for a minute.
Yeah, I really think I should tell you something. Well,
She made a stunning admission to Detective Green.
So we started having this.
The bombshell in this case was that Nancy indicated that she was having an affair with one of our police officers. Not only was he a police officer, but prior to coming onto the department, he had been a full-time minister and in fact was a chaplain with the Fresno Police Department, one of our own.
The officer's name was Paul Hurth. Nancy told the detectives that she and Hurth had been involved for several months, but she said she recently ended the affair. Hurth couldn't accept the breakup and continued calling her.
You know, he's also a Baptist minister, so I didn't want anybody
Investigators now faced the possibility of a killer in their ranks.
When Ralph was at work, sometimes we do that.
After Nancy's admission, she took the polygraph and passed.
You had a question about talking about...
An internal committee was formed to investigate.
We knew we had to hurry on this case. If a police officer was the suspect and we were allowing an officer to continue to work and he was a murder suspect, speed was of the utmost.
Police checked the staff sign-in sheet for the night of Ralph's murder.
Is there any indication they were supposed to work that night?
No, should have been his regular day off.
All right. Is that
According to the sheet, Officer Hurth and his partner were on duty during the time in question.
I'll later what's going on in this. Thanks.
When investigators spoke with Hurth's partner, he said that he had not worked that night and had not initialed the sign-out sheet.
With you. Do you work with Paul Hurth?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
It appeared Officer Hurth was attempting a cover-up. Police called him in for questioning.
Hi, Paul. Sergeant Green with Homicide. This is Detective Marietta. I want to talk to you about the death of Ralph Gower. Occurred about a week ago.
Actually, I was expecting a call from you.
Really?
Hey, look, I didn't do
Hirth was forthcoming about the affair, but denied committing any crime.
I may have broke some police rules, but again, I didn't murder anybody.
Okay, well, that's kind of what we thought. We were wondering if maybe you couldn't fill us in a little bit. Were you working February 18th?
Yes.
Oh, you were?
Yes. Yeah, I was on patrol at a college campus.
He stated that he had been on patrol on the 18th.
And I broke up the fight.
You were,
They asked
you
about
were
his
with,
partner.
A partner that night?
It was Officer Andre Benson.
So he was working?
No, I signed him in, but he wasn't there.
Oh, he didn't show up? Or?
I signed him in, but he didn't show up.
Okay. Could we look in your locker?
When they asked Hirth if they could search his house and his work locker, he agreed.
Take a look at your gun?
That'd be okay.
Okay, good. Let's go down to, let's go out this way and take a look at, okay, could you step right back over there? Okay.
They took his police-issued equipment along with his uniform. Inside the officer's home, investigators located his service weapon. It was a .40 caliber Beretta, the same caliber gun used in the killing of Ralph Gower. Criminalists Iqbal Sikhan and Gary Kortner received Hirth's weapon. The gun was fired into a sealed water tank. Fired slugs from Hirth's pistol would be compared to the slugs that killed Ralph Gower. Police waited anxiously for results to see if the gun used to uphold the law would be the same weapon used to break it. Fresno police were investigating fellow officer Paul Hirth. They believed he had murdered the husband of his former lover, Nancy Gower. Criminalist Iqbal Sikhan performed a side-by-side comparison of slugs fired from Officer Hirth's handgun and the bullets that killed Ralph Gower. Sikhan looked at several class characteristics, including the caliber, the direction of the twist, and the lands and grooves of the slugs. The results pointed directly at the suspect.
The bullets that killed the victim came out of Paul Hirth's duty pistol.
Paul Hirth was arrested for the murder of Ralph Gower. When he was confronted with the evidence, he quickly changed his story.
Paul, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can't.
Officer Hirth now claimed he went to the Gower house with the sole intention of apologizing for his indiscretions with Ralph's wife.
I know you having relations with your wife. With my wife? Yeah, how's the matter with you?
When Hirth told him about the affair, he became enraged and attacked the officer. He said during the struggle, Ralph got control of his baton. He said he went into police mode and drew his gun. After shooting Ralph twice, he panicked and proceeded to clean up the room. Finally, he let himself out through the garage and returned to work. Hirth's claim of shooting Ralph Gower in self-defense rang hollow with investigators.
Slightly higher as it exits.
To test the officer's story, they re-examined the crime scene reports.
Spots about the size of a $50, 50-cent piece.
About a dime, yeah, 10 cents. Yeah.
They believed the angle of the bullet wounds to Gower's chest proved he'd been shot from above at a distance of 2 feet while lying defenseless on the floor. Investigators returned to the Gower house.
6 feet 3. Get over here. It was on the ground at that time.
Right. Okay.
Yes. And let's see if there is any other
chance of-
evidence of any damage.
They
to the
scoured the
walls.
crime scene for any indication of bullet damage to the walls. If the victim had been standing, as Hurth claimed, the bullets would have passed through his body and there would be damage to the walls. But there was none.
Possible scenario is that the victim was.
All the crime scene evidence supported the case that Officer Hurth was standing over the victim when he fired.
Or you could be here.
Despite convincing evidence, prosecutors know juries are often reluctant to convict officers of the law. Fresno authorities turned to the FBI. Police enlisted the help of forensic profiler and criminalist Mark Safaric. As a special agent with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, Safaric studies crime scene photos and other evidence from individual cases. From the case materials, he developed a profile of the dynamics that took place between the victim and the assailant. His conclusions in the Gower case contradicted Paul Hurth's claims of self-defense.
I think both behaviorally and forensically, it's clear that Gower was not in a position to present a threat to Hurth. There's no indication his hands were in front of his face or attempting to ward off the potential of being shot. And the fact that the gunshot wounds are so close together, almost directly over the heart area, tells me that he was likely unconscious at the time he was shot.
Based on the evidence, police believe that Paul Hurth went to Ralph Gower's house with no other intention but to kill him. Nancy Gower had ended the affair, and he needed to dispose of his rival. Investigators believe Hurth struck Gower with his baton, then proceeded to handcuff him to a table leg before shooting him twice in the chest. Investigators concluded that Paul Hurth acted alone, and Nancy had no knowledge of his intentions. Paul Hurth was convicted of aggravated manslaughter for the death of Ralph Gower. He was sentenced to 20 years. Killers commit their crimes for many reasons. But when they are driven by dark emotion, they unwittingly leave behind a history of clues. Forensic science exploits these clues to uncover hard evidence and solve crimes of passion. In Northern California, a car crashes down an embankment in the dead of night. Rescue workers scramble to save a couple trapped inside. But the routine investigation takes an unexpected twist when details about the victims are revealed. Not far away, in Palo Alto, a woman is found dead at the bottom of the basement stairs. As detectives look into the accident, they begin to question the sequence of events. Sometimes, first impressions mask the truth. A tragic accident, a happy marriage, a solid alibi. In the face of murder, all these come under scrutiny. To solve the demanding cases, investigators must sift through the debris of shattered vows. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. El Dorado County, California, the Golden Country, where traffic is light and barely lit roads are the norm. On October 27, 1992, one of those roads offered up a deadly turn. Around 8 p.m., a man driving alone noticed swerving headlights in his rearview mirror and heard a crash. When he looked back, the car was gone. Fearing that someone was seriously injured, he turned around and pulled off to the side of the road. He saw the vehicle at the bottom of the embankment. He ran down to help. The woman sat motionless. Her companion sat dazed and in pain.
Fire emergency.
A car went over the embankment.
Are there people injured?
Yeah, there's 2 people inside, and I think the driver's dead. The other guy's hurt real bad.
Units from the Folsom Fire Department raced to the scene. Officers from the California Highway Patrol and other emergency personnel moved quickly to rescue the victims. Rescue workers carrying equipment helped each other down the steep embankment. Paramedics confirmed the woman was dead. The passenger identified himself as Mitch McLeese. He said he couldn't move his legs. Paramedics suspected internal injuries. When asked about the accident, he said he couldn't remember much. He told them he was a friend of the woman who was driving. Her driver's license identified her as Susan Moyer, a 52-year-old woman from El Dorado.
We're gonna help you out. We have to get you out of this car first, okay? Just try to relax.
McLeese said he must have fallen asleep. When he woke up, they were in the ditch. Paramedics rushed the passenger to Sacramento Medical Center for treatment. A deputy from the El Dorado Sheriff's Department arrived at Susan Moyer's home around 11 p.m. He told Ken Moyer his wife had been killed in a car accident. The officer asked questions, gathering information about Ken's wife, Susan, and her passenger, Mitch McLeese. Moyer said McLeese was one of his employees. He also told him that McLeese helped them move to California from Sarasota, Florida.
Today, so I can just start in the kitchen tomorrow?
Ken and Susan were newlyweds, and McLeese stayed on to do some work in their new home. That evening, Moyer had to leave for an appointment around 7:15 and couldn't take McLeese back to his hotel.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Susan offered to drive him when he was done.
Gentleman that was with
Moyer
you
said when he returned home around 8:30, Susan still wasn't home, and he began to worry. He drove around searching for her. Moyer told the deputy he blamed himself for the accident. He said if he'd taken McLeese home, Susan would still be alive.
No, I left.
The next day, an autopsy was performed. X-rays revealed the victim's 4th and 5th cervical vertebrae had been fractured and dislocated. Susan Moyer had broken her neck. The victim's eyes were black and swollen, indicating Susan's head hit the steering wheel on impact. According to police reports, the car had rolled down the steep embankment. The coroner determined her injuries were consistent with the accounts. The death was ruled accidental. Susan's body was released to her husband. She was cremated and her remains sent to her hometown of Sarasota, Florida, for burial. Police are required to investigate all traffic fatalities and went to the hospital to follow up on passenger Mitch McLeese.
Do you mind if I actually take a look at that?
But the nurse informed the officer that McLeese wouldn't let the doctors perform any tests and had checked himself out hours earlier.
A few hours ago, he left a couple friends.
Against doctor's orders. At the El Dorado Sheriff's Office, Lieutenant Jim Roloff had questions. The only witness to the accident had left town, and it seemed suspicious.
Our seriously injured victim, who was supposedly in the hospital dying, has checked out and gone home to Washington, the state of Washington. So, you know, at that point, things started not looking too good.
Lieutenant Roloff reviewed the autopsy report for anything out of the ordinary. He found nothing. But all that was about to change.
Lieutenant Roloff.
Hi, this is Detective Beecham from the Sarasota.
In Sarasota, Florida, a detective from the Special Investigations Unit relayed information to Lieutenant Roloff from Susan Moyer's family. She said they didn't believe her death was an accident. Florida investigators told Roloff they conducted a preliminary background check into the Moyers.
Going to do a reconstruction on this.
They discovered Susan was recently awarded a $3.7 million settlement when her first husband was killed in a small plane crash. According to family members, Ken Moyer came into her life shortly after she received the money. This information raised suspicions.
Yeah.
Roloff and his team decided to re-examine the accident.
The first thing that had to be established is, how did this woman die? And was it, in fact, as a result of injuries suffered in the accident, or was it from some other means?
California Highway Patrol's major accident investigation team, known as MATE, was called in to help find an answer. At the scene, the investigators reconstructed the accident.
Okay, next one.
They measured the slope of the embankment and the length of the tire tracks to learn exactly how the car ended up in the ditch. Paul Whiting headed the investigation.
We get an approximate speed of the vehicle, the amount of time that it took for it to come to a stop. From that, we can calculate the forces, the approximate forces that the vehicle experienced as it dissipated its energy coming to a stop.
Broken branches would also help gauge the force of the car's descent. The greater the damage, the harder and faster the car tumbled. Though the trees showed scars of the accident, Whiting and his team found that the damage was minimal.
We determined there simply wasn't enough force generated to the vehicle and thus to the occupants of the vehicle to produce the deadly injuries that she received.
The investigation team now needed to closely examine the car, which had been towed to the impound lot the night of the accident. Paul Whiting was puzzled. He found the car's condition particularly unusual.
We could find no significant damage to the interior of the car. We checked the steering wheel. It wasn't bent in any direction. There was no marks in the dashboard. The pedals were all intact. There was nothing on the interior of the car that would have suggested a significant human impact with any of those structures.
Investigators checked for blood or fibers to determine if Susan Moyer or her passenger had hit the windshield. no evidence was found in the glass. Whiting concluded the glass shattered from the stress of the collision and not because one of the passengers hit their heads on the windshield. The exterior of the car also showed little serious impact.
The damage to the left front is the only damage that is significant at all. At the most, it would represent a speed change of 10 miles an hour. Now, the forces in a 10-mile-an-hour speed change would be comparable to backing into a light post from a parked position. So it's not the kind of forces that we would expect to see fractured necks or death-producing injuries from.
Whiting and his team found no evidence the car had rolled over or that it was involved in a serious accident. Lieutenant Roloff read the mate report and grew more skeptical.
I got a favor. As you start down this road, everything you're developing says that this accident is not what it appears to be.
Authorities now believed Susan Moyer's death was not an accident. But proving it would not be easy. Susan's body had been cremated and all physical evidence of her death destroyed. In El Dorado, California, Susan Moyer was found dead at the scene of a car crash. After reconstructing the accident, investigators now believed she was murdered. And they discovered there was a possible motive. Police grew suspicious after they learned the victim's new husband stood to inherit almost $4 million upon her death. Detective Sergeant Hal Lamb of the Homicide Division discussed the mate findings with Lieutenant Jim Roloff.
They were telling us that the forces involved in this accident weren't sufficient to cause the broken neck.
Because Susan Moyers had been cremated, Detective Sergeant Lamb had to rely on the original autopsy report and details observed at the scene.
Fortunately, the night of the accident, we had a sheriff's corner investigator that had gone out and took a series of photographs of Susan inside of the vehicle, and so we had those to work with.
The photographs revealed the position of the body, blood patterns on the victim's face, and bruising around the eyes. Armed with this new information, investigators turned to the Sacramento Forensic Services Department and Chief Medical Examiner Gregory Schmunk. He reviewed the reports, photographs, and eyewitness accounts of emergency personnel at the scene.
The description that there was bruising around both of the eyes within seconds to minutes after the accident, as described by the paramedic on the scene, would be very unusual. It takes some time for that bruising to occur because the blood has to seep through those soft tissues. That indicated to me that the death had occurred prior to her driving off the road.
The photographs also showed dried blood patterns on the victim's face. These blood stains ran down the side of the victim's face toward her ear. But the effects of gravity after the accident should have made the blood drip down the front of her face.
The blood pattern on the body was not consistent with the way she was positioned in the vehicle.
Schmuck closely examined the autopsy report in light of the California Highway Patrol's analysis of the accident.
There was a fracture of the mid-neck that was inconsistent with any type of fracture that I'd ever seen in a motor vehicle accident, such as the type that Susan was in. There was no rollover, there was no significant impact. So the location of the fracture was unusual for that type of incident. I'd concluded that the fracture of the neck and therefore the cause of Susan Moyer's death was not due to a motor vehicle accident.
Now they needed to find out exactly how this woman died and who wanted her dead.
Where's it go, I think?
They turned to her husband, Ken Moyer, and the only survivor of the crash, Mitch McLeese. But McLeese had abruptly left town after the accident. And Ken Moyer had returned to his home in Florida, where he owned a sporting goods store. Police spoke to those closest to the couple. They were hoping to find out more about their relationship. Close friend Kyle Dallinger lived nearby.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Kyle told police Ken Moyer was distraught the day after the accident.
Sir, what are you doing?
Moyer asked him if he would drive him to the hospital to pick up his friend Mitch McLeese, who was checking out. The neighbors said he saw Ken Moyer hand McLeese a plane ticket.
Yeah, I overheard a phone
He was
call.
told Mitch McLeese was not going home, but relocated to a small town outside of Seattle.
Did he make any comments to you about this?
Given this new information, the police were beginning to uncover a murderous plot.
Leave town, take a vacation.
We really felt that Ken Moyer was the brains behind this whole thing. We thought that it was a homicide for money at that point, and we felt that Mitch McLeese was just the hired hand.
Detectives went to Washington to interview McLeese. When detectives identified themselves, he was shaken.
Yeah, actually we're detectives from El Dorado County Sheriff's Department. I'm Detective Hal Lamb, this is Detective Bill Wilton. We're here to talk to you about the accident you were involved in with Susan Moyer.
McLeese stuck to the story that Susan was driving and he had fallen asleep. He said he woke up just as the car plunged down the embankment and didn't know what caused the accident.
Yeah?
Because of everything they had uncovered, detectives knew they weren't getting the whole story.
And obviously Susan can't tell us what happened. He was lying. There's no question that he was lying. But we didn't really have enough physical evidence to arrest him at that time.
They needed more. So Lieutenant Roloff sent detectives to Sarasota, the Moyers' hometown, to talk to the people who knew them best.
I made a list of some individuals that I feel warrant some further questioning.
They met the local investigators who had been gathering information about the Moyers and their employee, Mitch McLeese. The detectives learned about an affair Ken Moyer was having with a woman by the name of Betty Ann Brown. Detectives interviewed Brown, who admitted she'd been seeing Ken for the last 2 years.
I know he was very upset.
She was shocked when she heard he was getting married.
And I'm being interviewed.
But he assured her that his marriage would not interfere with their relationship.
This card's okay?
Absolutely.
And Ken Moyer kept seeing Betty Ann on a regular basis.
Don't you want that? Yeah. Once, I believe.
She admitted that they'd had an intimate encounter just before the wedding. The day of the funeral, they had an intimate encounter after the funeral, and she even gave us the location and the time of the motel that she met with him.
Detectives began interviewing employees at Ken's sporting goods store. And it seemed as if everyone had a similar story to tell. According to everyone who knew him, Ken's marriage to Susan was not about love.
We learned from all the people that we had interviewed that it was apparent that Ken Moyer had married Susan for her money, and that Ken really didn't care for Susan.
I asked him.
He had told one of his employees, it was a question-answer thing, Eddie, do you know why someone gets married? And Eddie says, for love, and Ken says, no, it's for money.
Police now had a clear motive, but the crime and the crime scene still remained unclear. They now believed the accident was staged to cover up Susan's murder. But linking Ken Moyer and Mitch McLeese to the killing would take more than motive. It would take proof in the form of forensic evidence. California detectives began investigating an accident, but ended up uncovering a murder. They believed Ken Moyer had paid one of his employees to kill his wife, Susan. Although the circumstantial evidence was compelling, they had no physical proof. Investigators Lamb and Roloff now believed they knew how Susan had died, but they still had no direct evidence to prove that Moyer or McLeese had killed her.
Go over, take a look at it, and see where we want to go from there.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
4 months after the crash, a newspaper article prompted a local handyman to contact police. The worker told detectives Ken Moyer had hired him to regrout some tiles in his foyer.
First layer, it wouldn't be a problem, and just relay everything, but he wanted the grout and everything taken out, completely redone.
Okay, Chuck, here's the spots I want you to
Moyer
look at.
explained that he'd spilled cherry cough medicine, and it had penetrated the grout. The worker told Moyer that he didn't need to replace the grout, just scrape and regrout the stained portions.
All the way to the cement. All this grout out, this whole section here.
Just because I was concerned about it. So
And Mr. Moyer insisted that he remove all the grout and replace it all. And he told us that as he was removing that grout, that Mr. Moyer was sitting there with a vacuum, vacuuming up the stained grout.
He described precisely where the tiles were located. Since the tiles were porous, he felt confident that some of the red stains still remained.
This is the area by the door that we're really concerned with. The tile guy, this is the area that he came in and pointed out to us. Some area right in here.
Police obtained a warrant to search the Moyers' house. Faye Ann Springer, a criminalist for Sacramento County, examined the tiles for bloodstains. A preliminary examination revealed no outward signs of blood.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll spray in this area first and then work our way down towards the door.
Working systematically, Springer sprayed the area with a chemical called fluorescein, which glows in the presence of minute quantities of blood.
Oh, we're getting a little weak reaction in a couple of places here. It doesn't identify blood, it only gives you areas of interest. And there were at least 2 areas of interest in the entryway. What we did then is request that those tiles be actually physically removed because the amount of blood was not visible to the eye, so we wanted to look at the sides of the tile to see if blood may have seeped between the actual ceramic tiles and in through the grout.
The tiles were brought to the lab and did in fact test positive for blood. Springer then had to determine whether or not it was Susan Moyer's. And she wasn't sure this could be done.
The amount of material was marginal for testing. It's very difficult to test blood stains that are in grout or cement, but I thought there might be enough present on the tiles that they could get enough material, DNA material, out of it.
Springer was right. The sample did contain enough DNA for testing. A comparison to the victim's DNA proved the blood on the tiles was Susan Moyer's. On March 27, 1993, Ken Moyer was arrested in Sarasota, Florida, and returned to California. Investigators pieced together the events that led to Susan's murder. Ken Moyer had courted and married her for money. After the wedding, he moved her to California, far away from loved ones who would ask too many questions. Moyer then enlisted Mitch McLeese and gave him money to help him carry out the murder. On the night of October 27, 1992, McLeese crept up behind the unsuspecting victim and broke her neck. The force of the break caused her nose to bleed and blood to spatter on the floor. Her death was instant. Detectives believe Ken Moyer helped McLeese put his wife's body into the car.
And I think that Mitch McLeese sat in the passenger seat and reached over and steered the vehicle and probably operated the gas with his left foot.
Ken Moyer was convicted of the first-degree murder of Susan Moyer. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Mitch McLeese was also convicted of first-degree murder and received an identical sentence. Some killers will go to great lengths to hide their true nature and conceal their crimes. But in Palo Alto, California, it is the secret itself that unmasks a killer. Palo Alto is an affluent bedroom community of San Francisco in the heart of Silicon Valley. This quiet area can offer a sense of security and a refuge away from urban life. But sometimes danger is closer than it looks.
911 emergency.
On May 5th, 2000, police dispatch received a 911 call. A woman had fallen down the stairs and was not breathing. The dispatcher alerted the Palo Alto police and the rescue squad, who raced to the scene. Moments later, police arrived at the residence of Maryanne and William Slater. Despite all the rescue efforts, it was too late.
That's all we got.
Maryanne Slater could not be resuscitated.
251 dispatch. Go ahead and dispatch me a coroner and a detective at this location.
2 classes today. There's one at 10:20.
Detective Mike Denson spoke with the victim's husband.
And so
William Slater told the investigator that nothing unusual happened that day.
I thought she might still be.
He said after their morning jog, Maryanne left around 10 o'clock to teach a piano class. And he left the house an hour later to survey a new building site.
Okay. Have a good day.
He stayed at the site until 1 p.m.
For work,
When he left to meet some friends for lunch, William said he received a call from his wife's work.
I came back to the house. Hello?
She had not shown up for her second
Oh,
class.
that's strange. She was at home when I left. Did you try her cell phone?
He grew concerned and called home several times, but there was no answer.
Told me that she had
William also told Detective Denson it was not unusual for Maryanne to go home in between classes.
There she was at the bottom of the stairs.
When he returned home,
I ran
he discovered
down.
the tragic accident.
Music teacher.
He said that he looked down the stairs and she was laying on the stairs and was not responsive. He told me that he believed that she had fallen down the stairs, and he noticed that she was wearing these particular shoes, and he knew that she had fallen in those shoes previously. And so he speculated that she was carrying something down the stairs, tripped on the shoes and fell down the stairs.
By all accounts, it looked like a terrible accident.
She'd fallen down the stairs, pronounced her dead.
Maryanne, home alone, had tripped, hit her head, and died.
Blood on the bell up there, on the steps, and other places. So, and she is not.
An initial assessment of the scene indicated that the victim appeared to have been doing laundry when she fell. Like all unattended deaths, Maryanne Slater's body was sent to the coroner's lab for autopsy. Assistant Medical Examiner Coroner Diane Vertis performed the examination and quickly became suspicious.
See this? See the neck?
Well, initially we looked for injuries consistent with the story that she fell down a flight of stairs. what we found was much different than what we were led to believe.
The external examination revealed 7 separate wounds to all different parts of the head.
What's very important about this is that these lacerations were not consistent with a single event. They were much more consistent with multiple blows to the head.
And you can feel the crest skull fracture.
What about the neck?
We also did find some injuries on the hands, and the injuries on the hands were more consistent with what we call defensive wounds.
Okay, we got a 1/4-inch laceration there.
The evidence suggested Maryanne Slater was beaten to death while trying to fend off her attacker. An internal examination revealed additional injuries to Maryanne's neck.
There were signs of strangulation. This, of course, was completely contrary to a simple fall down the stairs. This is something that we saw some signs of externally and became more evident on the internal exam.
Dr. Vertis called in Dr. Gregory Schmunk, the chief medical examiner coroner for Santa Clara County.
I first became involved at the investigation on a Friday evening when I got a phone call from one of my investigators that a woman had fallen downstairs. I told her to proceed as usual with her investigation. And the next thing that I heard about the case was when I heard the autopsy findings, that those autopsy findings were not consistent with a fall down the stairs.
After reviewing the crime scene photographs, Dr. Schmunk agreed with Dr. Vertis' findings that Maryanne's injuries did not occur from falling.
That examination made me conclude that the majority of the blows to the back of the head were not with a striking object, but were more likely the head being impacted against a straight surface or possibly a right-angled surface.
Maryanne Slater's death was no accident. This was murder. In Palo Alto, Maryanne Slater was found dead in her house from what appeared to be an accidental fall. But an autopsy revealed injuries inconsistent with this initial assessment. It now looked as though Maryanne was beaten and strangled. Detective Mike Denson of the Palo Alto Police Department believed a recent rash of burglaries in the neighborhood might provide a possible scenario.
Over the last 6 months, there have been several residential burglaries in the Southgate neighborhood. That was a consideration of mine as I began this investigation.
He checked previous reports of burglaries. Denson theorized the burglar might have been surprised by Maryanne and killed her.
That's what I came up with also.
To test the theory, investigators secured a search warrant and returned to the house. They checked the exterior perimeter, looking for signs of a break-in. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside the house, forensic examiners needed to pinpoint the exact location of her death. They started with the basement steps. Forensic technicians used the chemical luminol to locate the presence of blood. If Maryanne had actually fallen and hit her head, there would be a definite pattern of blood. There wasn't any spatter on the stairs at all. From the basement, they backtracked and examined other parts of the house.
Sarge, I didn't see any blood spatter.
Since the basement door opened into the kitchen, they began there.
We found some blood spatter and some dilute blood stain in the kitchen of the house. I knew at that time that we were going to have to do luminol to bring up a cleaned up crime scene, and so that was our next course of action, was to bring the luminol experts in to spray for luminol and detect blood stain.
If a room hid a bloody secret, luminol would find it. And in this case, it did exactly that. someone had tried to cover up a violent act. Chief Medical Examiner Gregory Schmunk.
The luminol test revealed that there was extensive blood throughout the house, especially that kitchen and an adjacent bathroom. It looked like there had been a primary crime scene in the kitchen where she had been assaulted, and then the assailant had later gone to the bathroom and probably washed up.
There was a huge amount of blood discovered, and no amount of cleaning could hide it. The kitchen floor glowed with the telltale signs of murder. Upon closer examination of the glow patterns, a partial left shoe print emerged. Maryanne Slater had been killed in the kitchen, and her body moved to the bottom of the stairs afterward. A burglar would have no reason to clean up a crime scene and stage a murder to look like an accident. Maryanne probably knew her killer. As a matter of routine, police needed to rule out Maryanne's husband, William, as a suspect. They first checked his alibi, starting with his phone calls.
I'd like you to photograph each of the calls that were received in this box, collect it, and then collect this address book for me as well.
Got it.
Thank you.
Hoping for anything that might lead to a break in the case, investigators collected the caller ID box from the Slaters' telephone, along with Maryanne's address book. At the State Crime Lab, a DNA profile was made from the blood found in the Slaters' kitchen. The profile was then compared to DNA extracted from Maryanne's body during autopsy. To no one's surprise, they matched. Police canvassed the Slaters' neighborhood to see if anyone had witnessed anything suspicious on the day of the murder. One neighbor told Sergeant Denson that a silver truck blocked the alleyway behind the Slater house around 12:30 that day.
It was about noon.
She paid particular attention to that vehicle because it was wide enough and the street was narrow enough that it made it uneasy for her to get around it. So she noticed it and made a mental note of it at that time.
She couldn't go anywhere for half an hour. Police knew William Slater drove a silver truck.
In the house all day?
This would indicate that William was actually in the neighborhood at the time of the murder, not at the work site as he had told detectives earlier. An officer searched the construction area for any evidence or anyone who could corroborate William's story. He found nothing. Across the street, the officer noticed a driving range that had a fairly good view of the vacant lot. He questioned the clerk at the golf club to see if she had seen anyone over there on the day in question. The clerk said that she knew William, and although she was working that afternoon, she hadn't seen him or anyone else there. Detective Denson looked closer at the rest of William's story. The Slaters' caller ID registered a call from Maryanne's work and several calls from William's cell phone. Denson tracked the location of the calls.
When you turn a cell phone on or hit send to make a call, the cell phone will search for the strongest signal or the closest cell site to put the call through. Since he was telling me he was on 101 at Woodside Road, he theoretically should have been hitting a cell site close to that location. In fact, he was hitting a cell site that was close to his house.
It looked as if police could not eliminate William Slater as a murder suspect. His alibi was falling apart. Police believed the man who just a few days ago seemed like the grieving widower
Just as we were looking around,
was actually a killer.
on the bell up there, on the steps.
But to prove it, investigators knew they needed to physically link him to the accident. Palo Alto investigators believed William Slater had staged an accident to cover up the murder of his wife. Now they had to prove it. The autopsy revealed that Maryanne had been beaten and strangled, and William's alibi had fallen apart. But he didn't appear to have a motive. By all accounts, the Slaters were happy. They recently celebrated their 25th anniversary and had 2 children together. To learn more, Detective Denson called Maryanne's friends and family.
My intention was to call all the friends that I could discover in the address book and see if I could find potential motive. And I was just calling up and asking them if they could think of anything that would help the investigation. And ultimately found a friend that was aware of an affair that occurred some 20 years ago.
Edward Dale had been a friend of Maryanne's for most of her life.
Hi, how you doing, sir? This is Sergeant Mike Denson with Palo Alto Police Department.
Denson interviewed Dale about his relationship with Maryanne and William.
About 15 years.
He told the detective he had an affair with Maryanne. During the time of the affair, Maryanne became pregnant with Dale's son. William Slater raised the boy as his own, never suspecting he was not the father of the child. The last time Dale saw Maryanne, she told him she planned to reveal their secret to her son on his graduation day.
You to know that.
Dale said he was relieved. The secret had gone on too long. The family secret provided police with a possible motive. And Detective Denson did a little more digging.
I did a thorough investigation using the FBI Financial Analyst Unit in Virginia, and I had them do the full financial records check.
He learned the Slaters had money problems, and their finances were dwindling away.
He was doing his own business, but it was not bringing in very much income, so we basically found them to be broke.
Denson learned through friends that Maryanne was not aware of their financial problems. William Slater seemed to have many secrets, but investigators still had no physical evidence linking him to murder. Police obtained a search warrant to examine the vehicle he had been driving the day his wife was killed. The truck was impounded, and forensic technicians scoured the interior for evidence. Stashed underneath the front seat was a T-shirt. A stain that appeared to be blood was discovered. The shirt was bagged and marked as evidence. A search of the back seat revealed a pair of athletic shoes. The technician noticed several red smudges on them. The items were sent to the State Crime Lab for analysis. Samples from the stains on both the shoes and the shirt tested positive for human blood. To determine whose blood it was, DNA was extracted from the samples, following careful procedure to avoid contamination of the evidence. A computer-aided comparison was made between the samples and the DNA of the victim, Maryanne Slater. They matched. But a small amount of blood might not hold up in court and could possibly be explained away. A print expert examined the left shoe found in William's truck to see if it matched the tread pattern found on the print in Slater's kitchen. After the shoe was inked, a sample print was carefully made and a transparency was created. A comparison revealed both prints had identical tread and matching wear patterns. The prints were made by the shoes in the truck. It was the break police needed. On May 19, 2000, 2 weeks after the murder of his wife, police arrested William Slater. Although he initially denied any involvement, after several hours of questioning, William confessed to killing his wife. He flew into a rage after his wife revealed her infidelity. At first, he tried to strangle her, but when she fought back, he kicked her to death. He then placed her body at the foot of the basement stairs to stage the accident. And returned to clean up the blood in the kitchen.
His life was shaken to the max, and I believe that he killed her as a result of that. In addition, they were financially unstable at this point, and his whole life was about to change or changing.
William Slater was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Killers who are closest to their victims often believe they can cover up their crimes and fool investigators. But more often, forensic evidence is discovered, unmasking the deceit and bringing the perpetrators to justice.
It's a good, tight little house. We've never really had any problems. I'm sure you guys will enjoy this.
A New York homebuyer gets more than he bargained for when a house inspection turns up a mummified corpse. For decades, the crime had gone undiscovered, the victim unmissed, and the killer unpunished.
Look at this.
Now, investigators face a double mystery: identifying the victim and finding the murderer. In a rural Indiana hospital, a sudden soaring death rate raises critical questions about one of the nurses. It appears a poisoner has joined the staff, but the proof is scant, and building the case will require intensive care. When faith is misplaced, the result can be murder, leading investigators to solve another case of broken trust. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. Nassau County, New York, on Long Island, is home to almost 1.5 million people. It's close enough to enjoy the benefits of New York City while maintaining a quiet suburban lifestyle.
Yeah, you can see. No water damage.
In the fall of 1999, a new resident made the final walkthrough of the house he was about to purchase. The solid, old structure had weathered more than 50 New York winters. Within its walls, a half-century of history had passed. Some stayed behind. Tucked in the crawl space, a 55-gallon drum sealed tight. According to the seller, it had always been there, too heavy to move. The homeowner assumed it was filled with construction debris. The buyer wanted it gone.
I tried to move it a couple of times. It's a heavy sucker.
That's gotta go. I can't stay here.
Together, they managed to move it to the curb. But the trash collector refused to take it. Its weight exceeded the limit. Hoping to divide the load, the owner attempted to pry off the lid. Rust had made it almost impossible. Finally, he managed to breach the seal. The stench was staggering and unmistakable. Inside was a withered hand. The owner rushed to call the police.
That's police emergency operator 475.
He'd only caught a glimpse, but that was all he needed. Detectives Brian Parpan and Robert Edwards arrived, along with crime techs. The owner described the situation. Detective Parpan took it from there.
The first impression was an overwhelming odor when we opened the barrel. Inside the barrel, we could see a hand that certainly appeared to be human. The barrel itself and the information that we had initially at the scene, we thought we were looking at something probably about 18 to 20 years old.
Before the barrel was moved, Detective Parpan ordered it thoroughly photographed, inside and out. Detective Robert Edwards devised his strategy.
We closed the barrel up at that time and decided that we were going to take the whole package to the medical examiner's office, where we could do a very in-depth investigation. You know, this is a little unusual. You come to somebody's house, a new owner is coming in to take over, and he looks in a crawl space and he finds a 55-gallon drum. We eventually find out that there's a body in it. Now we want to make sure there's nothing buried in the area around the house before we give it up.
When they could find no evidence of any other bodies around the house, the investigation shifted to the medical examiner's office.
We can put the others.
Investigators processed the contents of the barrel. Their most puzzling find, handfuls of granules or pellets.
I thought it was some kind
The detectives had no clue what they were made of or what they were used for.
pelletized plastic.
They tagged some to send to the lab. Next, green liquid.
Put this in the bag.
Again, its chemical composition and relevance remained a mystery. At least for now. Further digging put the homicide detectives into more familiar territory. A small purse emerged from the depths, its soaking wet contents practically disintegrating. Still, maybe it held a clue.
Can you get at it?
Yes.
And then, the victim. Mummified in the airless, waterlogged tomb. Hiding a secret for so many years. The body concealed more peculiar objects underneath.
We'll save them in there.
The single stem of a plastic flower.
I'm not sure what this is.
Plastic.
A locket with an inscription,
Can you see anything?
"To Patrice from Uncle Phil," suggesting the victim was female. Some more liquid and some sediment.
Jewelry in here.
And among the sediment, 2 gold rings. One with the initials MHR inscribed inside.
For that, the jewelry could certainly be important. We have a name, Patrice. We have a second name, Uncle Phil. So this gives us some background that we can search and try to find out who we're dealing with, who the victim is.
But the most obvious clue was perhaps the barrel itself.
Look at this. There's got some kind of identification on the bottom of it. We didn't see it before because it hasn't been over. Shrux, you want to get a photograph of that?
Okay.
Upended, it revealed letters stenciled and embossed into it, and the fragment of a sticker or logo suggested it once served a more legitimate purpose. The authorities would follow up on it, but first, the victim had to be freed.
Removing the remains from the barrel, it was quite laborious. It took quite a long time. It was done very, very slowly. The material that was in the barrel, eventually we learned was to weight it down, was removed ladle by ladle. It was separated. It was put aside for our lab to be tested.
And then actually removing the body was done very, very carefully so as not to cause any additional damage.
The remains were sent to the medical lab.
Let's see what we got here.
Detective Parpan and his team turned their attention to an address book pulled from the victim's purse.
Oh, this is completely saturated. Sparks, can you get a picture of that, please?
The liquid had reduced the pages to little more than pulp.
Let me flip it for you.
As a clue, it didn't look promising.
Try not to tear it.
But a business card tucked inside the handbag showed a little more potential. It came from a physician in Union City, New Jersey.
Boy, that's really...
Down the hall, the victim herself underwent an examination. Her mummified body was carefully measured. Even though time had shrunk her remains, her bones revealed her approximate living height, about 4'9". Her bone structure indicated she was probably in her late 20s and possibly of Hispanic descent. As part of her autopsy, she was x-rayed. The films revealed she suffered a massive head injury.
Skull fractures.
They displayed unusual gold bridgework in her mouth.
Such a nice headshot.
And they exposed a great deal more. She was pregnant.
Near-term pregnancy. Look at that.
The cause of death here was somewhat obvious in the blunt trauma to the head. The pregnancy, which was a shock to everybody, gave us probably in our own minds an initial motive that we'd be dealing with someone this far along in their pregnancy.
Investigators turned their attention to the dental work, which appeared to have been made outside of the United States.
Skip like that, isn't it?
The additional things that came out of the autopsy and the forensic odontologist informed us of the dentistry, the unusual type of dental activity that was there, so we were dealing with someone from another country. So we were able to pretty much come up with a race, an age, and the fact that this person was obviously a homicide victim, but a pregnant homicide victim.
The autopsy told investigators much about the victim, but not the most crucial thing: who she was. After all this time, flesh still remained on her fingers. An outside chance her prints could be raised. According to standard procedure, some fingers were amputated and sent to Detective Charles Costello.
I was advised I was going to be getting fingers from the individual in the drum, and I didn't know what to expect as far as condition of the skin, the tissue, the body of the tissue of the fingers that I would receive.
Though still flexible, the shriveled fingers didn't lend themselves to ordinary ink rolling. To eliminate the wrinkles and expose the ridge detail, Costello used a hypodermic to inflate the tips with air. But the skin deflated too quickly. Costello revised his plan.
What I did, I took twine and devised a tourniquet. Put a tourniquet around the second digit of the finger. Same way you would stop the blood, I was trying to stop the air from leaking out of the finger. I tied it off as tight as I could. I again attempted with the hypodermic needle. Was successful in getting it to inflate and stay inflated.
He rolled and printed the finger. And after all that, a search of the New York State and FBI fingerprint archives revealed no matches. It's been said that you can tell a person by the company she keeps, and that is what investigators were counting on. The victim's address book, saturated and almost useless, provided the last desperate chance to find her identity. Most pages were stuck together, too fragile to move, too faded to read. Forensic document examiner Joan Furtner began to gently pry the loose pages apart. The process could not be rushed. As each page dried, Furtner separated it and returned the address book to the drying chamber.
What I had to do was take the evidence and I had to put it into a forensic drying cabinet, which helps to draw out the moisture, and that helps the paper fibers in the paper to become stronger so I can manipulate the pages better.
Detectives already had one address to follow up, from the physician's business card in the victim's purse.
No good. Non-working number.
The number had been disconnected.
Let's check the book.
Book on Jersey?
Got the Jersey book right here. Must have known we needed it right on top.
A New Jersey phone book provided a physician of the same name at a different address. Detectives were dispatched.
Yes, we'd like to talk about...
They learned the doctor had long since passed away.
Do you mind coming with me? I can answer your questions on...
His daughter had taken over the practice, but had only kept records for 5 years.
I'm not sure if I'd be able to help you.
Even if the victim had once been a patient 20 years ago. Today, it was as if she had never existed. And that meant that someone had gotten away with murder. In New York, detectives Brian Parpan and Robert Edwards chased a phantom. An unnamed, pregnant woman killed decades ago by an unknown assailant. They had a locket to Patrice, love, Uncle Phil.
We have a doctor's name.
And they had her ring with the initials MHR. It was not much help.
Everybody's trying to come up with what that...
Detectives notified the missing persons squad, providing only a first name and asking them to go back in their database to 1980.
Nothing at that time had been computerized, so we had people come in, begin to search, do a hand search of the records. We're looking at an area of well over 5 or 6 million people, and a lot of people go missing in that period of time.
Bobby, there's nothing here. I can't do anything.
Another dead end.
Not doing anything for us.
Yeah.
In the Nassau County Criminalist section, detectives like Charles Conti took a different approach, focusing on the mysterious pellets found in the barrel.
We are trying to determine a possible origin of the pellets themselves, or in this particular case, it might be related to the barrel in which they were found in.
The pellets burned, giving off the unmistakable smell of plastic. A chemical analysis determined they were polystyrene, used to manufacture common household objects.
If we can trace back an origin, we might be able to link that to a possible suspect who might have been in contact with the deceased.
I was going to speak to someone in manufacturing.
On the theory that the industrial pellets and the industrial barrel were linked, Detective Parpan followed a lead.
Detective Parpan from Nassau County Homicide Squad.
He was happy to find out they were still doing business.
And we were able to contact them. By telling them the stenciling and the numbers that we had on the barrel, they were able to inform us that that particular barrel was manufactured in March of 1963. And that barrel, because it had a sticker on it, would have been sent to a chemical company.
That company closed in 1970, but was acquired by another one. The detectives traced the lead to the new company. The quality assurance manager checked the lot number.
What's in these barrels?
He determined the barrel carried a green liquid dye that stopped being manufactured in 1970. The same green liquid that immersed the victim.
What are we doing,
Finally,
Brian?
the investigators felt they were making progress.
Just trying to get some information down here, Bobby, so we can try to get a handle on it.
They now had a timeline for the murder. Between 1963, when the barrel was manufactured, and 1970, when the dye stopped being made.
Present to back.
Present to back?
All right.
But the building permits indicated the crawl space wasn't dug until the 1980s.
Okay.
So the murder had to have occurred after that date.
290.
Investigators wanted to talk to the homeowners who built the addition.
72.
because of where it was found, it's found under a house. So we're looking at something that we feel is a short list of suspects. Our initial thoughts was, who built this extension? You don't expect someone in a house to leave something like this there. You would expect someone who had a chance to be there undetected might put it there. We knew it was going to present a problem.
And these people.
May I get you something to drink?
According to records from City Hall, the extension was built in 1984, creating the crawl space where the barrel was found. Investigators paid a call on the owners of the house at that time.
1972.
They'd purchased it in 1971.
The extension was already there.
It was completed, yeah.
But they had surprising news.
They informed us that the extension was already there, and that it wasn't until they sold the house that a certificate of occupancy was actually signed and filed. The family you purchased it from.
The crawl space existed years before there was any official record of it, muddying the trail, but not for long.
Flower business, plastic flowers? Plastic flowers? Yeah, yeah.
They also informed us that the people that they purchased the house from, that he was an owner of a plastic flower company.
As the detectives inched closer to the possible identity of the killer, forensic document examiner Joan Fertner shed light on the victim. Some of the pages from the address book had dried enough to read. But after decades bathed in liquid dye and body fluids, most entries were no longer legible. Fertner used an alternate light source to decipher the faded writing.
The video spectrocomparator is an instrument that's hooked up to a computer monitor, and there are a series of cameras and filters and light sources that allow you to see from the ultraviolet to the infrared range of the spectrum. And it allows you to see outside of the range that the eyes normally can see.
Among the first things the apparatus revealed were the name, address, and resident alien number of the book's owner, the female victim.
I knew we had hit pay dirt and that this was something significant.
The investigators knew it too. Parpan and Edwards received the immigration records and a photo of the victim, Angelica Morrow Quinn, born in El Salvador in 1941, immigrated to the U.S. in 1966, and dead before the decade was out. She came to the U.S. to work as a nanny, then began working at a plastic flower company.
Based on the work that we did in the city to get information on Melrose Flower, we were able to identify who the owners of Melrose Flower were.
I'll be glad to hang on.
The company had two owners. One of them, Howard Elkins, also owned the house at the time the addition and crawl space were constructed.
We had spoken with all the other owners in the house. Mr. Elkins was the only one who was out of state.
Howard Elkins, the homeowner when the crawl space was dug, had become the prime suspect in the murder of Angelica Morrow Quinn.
We're going to check this whole area.
But the gap between suspicion and final justice can loom large. And investigators still had miles to go. Investigators had given a name and a face to an anonymous murder victim. Now they followed the trail of her killer. Before confronting their prime suspect, Howard Elkins, New York detectives Brian Parpan and Robert Edwards traveled to Florida to speak with his former business partner. He recognized photos of the barrel and said the company used to receive dye in them.
Matter of fact,
And it contained
Then,
dyes.
Detective Parpan asked him about Howard Elkins.
And now that in itself was not unusual. He was aware that Mr. Elkins had had an affair while he was working at Melrose Plastic and Flower Company. He had no information on it, but he knew that he had an affair, and he also knew that Mr. Elkins' wife and father-in-law had found out about it.
The affair was with one of the employees, a petite Hispanic woman with long dark hair and gold bridgework.
She was gone. What do you mean gone?
He didn't know much about her.
She never just showed up for work.
One day, she stopped coming to work.
Well, ladies that come for work from...
He recalled that a short time after the woman stopped coming to work, he took a phone message for Howard Elkins.
My former partner, so... I don't
It was a landlord in Hoboken, New Jersey.
No, I don't really care what
He wanted to know if Mr. Elkins wanted to keep the apartment. The woman no longer lived there.
Company, and he showed up...
The partner gave the message to Elkins, and the next day saw him come to work with his car filled with boxes and a television set. The detectives were now absolutely convinced Elkins was their man.
The description that the business partner gives of this particular person, even though we're dealing with a mummified body, is exactly what we're looking at when we remove the body from the barrel.
Have a seat.
Armed with the information, but revealing none of it, the investigator spoke with Howard Elkins himself.
Did you ever have an affair? Were you with anybody?
He invited us in, and it was almost like a game. He knew we knew, we knew he knew, we knew. He was trying to find out information from us, and we were trying to find out information from him.
But he gave up nothing. Elkins denied he'd ever seen that type of barrel.
Construction jobs, workers, and I'm sorry, I know nothing about those.
Mr. Elkins, you're going to tell us you've never seen a barrel like that before.
He remained poised and indifferent.
And we believe you're involved.
The investigators wouldn't relent.
I know where that barrel came from. I know where it's manufactured.
We didn't pussyfoot with him at all. I mean, we told him that, as far as we're concerned, you killed this girl.
Excuse me, gentlemen, I have a call. Hello?
His wife phoned.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't talk now. We'll talk about it.
Elkins spoke with her for a few moments, then asked the detectives to leave.
General, I'm sorry. I really have nothing else to say. I can't talk anymore. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave right now.
They asked him to provide a DNA sample,
My home. I have nothing to say.
but he declined.
I'll tell you what. We're going to leave. We're going to leave because you asked us to. But we're coming back.
I stood right in front of him, and I said, Mr. Elkins, we're leaving. I want you to know something. We're going to get a court order, and I'm going to get a court order for your blood. I'm going to match your blood up to the dead baby and that dead woman. And we're going to come back, we're going to put you in jail for the rest of your life.
You understand that, Mr. Elkins? You have a good day now, and we'll be back.
But that was the last time Detective Parpan saw Howard Elkins.
The next day, we attempted to get the warrants, and they were slow coming. That evening, we were notified, we were called to see if we had him in our custody. Apparently, his wife was looking for him.
He turned up the next day. His dark secret, kept hidden for 30 years, had finally destroyed him. The investigation continued. The medical examiner extracted a blood sample. The DNA was compared to the unborn child Angelica Marroquin carried. The baby was his. Work on the address book continued. Names and phone numbers were revealed. After 30 years, none worked, except one.
Yes, hi, this is Joni.
What we're doing is we're conducting an
Angelica's
investigation
friend had wondered about her all this
An
time.
incident that happened on Long Island.
When was this?
Well, it's just recent.
She told investigators she thought the young woman had returned to her family and was shocked to learn how her story had ended.
In a phone book that we're interested in.
She provided the detectives with the missing chapters.
How it appeared there and what you may know.
After losing touch with Angelica some years ago, the woman received a call from her. She said she was having an affair with her boss, but it was going well.
He's my angel, every single night.
He rented an apartment for her and was going to leave his wife.
Now what happened to her?
But a few months later, it began to sour.
Back to her country?
I don't know what to do. I think
Angelica
it's
told her
gonna
friend she was pregnant, and her boss refused to leave his wife.
What
Angelica had told his wife about the affair, and her boss threatened her life. Her friend said Angelica sounded panicked when she called. She asked her friend to come over.
Angelica!
And when she arrived at the apartment,
Angelica!
there was nobody there. The door was open.
Angelica!
The table was set for lunch. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of a fight. But Angel was not there. She waited for a period of time, and then she went to the local police.
Yes?
It was too soon to file a missing persons report. That was the last anyone had seen of Angelica Maryanne.
But you know, she said he treated her so well.
Investigators surmised between the time the friend spoke to Angelica on the phone and the time she arrived at the apartment, Elkins had shown up and ended her life. Killers often turn against those they love, leaving behind traces of their callous ways. Others prey upon those who empower them with blind trust. Clinton, Indiana, a small town of 5,000 people. But in 1995, that number started declining, suspiciously. The local hospital served the health needs of the residents of Clinton. The sick came here expecting to get better, and most of them did. In 1994, after a sudden stomach ailment, Ethel Roja was recovering beautifully.
I'm doing very well.
Oh, sure. Glad to see you feeling better.
Her husband, John, could finally relax.
All right, I haven't had it.
Ethel would be coming home soon.
Things were going real good in intensive care. Doctor's report was good. Then I went to the cafeteria to get a bite to eat and a cup of coffee. I would say that about 15 or 20 minutes later, I came back, and the picture there was totally opposite of the way I left her.
When Roja returned, his wife was in cardiac arrest. No one could explain why this woman on the verge of recovery would suddenly suffer heart failure. To doctors, it was a mystery.
My wife never was treated for heart disease. Never. She had no medical record of anything along the heart disease line. Never took any kind of medication or nothing.
Well, three cc's of epi. All right. Flat line still, doctor.
Okay.
Ethel Roja was dead.
We've given her 3
The official
cc's.
cause of death was acute heart failure.
We're just going to have to call it.
Ethel Roja wasn't the only one. Over the next year, the number of deaths at the county hospital's ICU continued to rise dramatically. Something about these sudden and mysterious deaths didn't seem right. The nursing staff grew suspicious.
Let's call it 137.
Hoping to find some explanation for the sudden rise in deaths, the supervising nurse reviewed her staff logbooks over the course of the previous years. Some disturbing patterns emerged. Between 1993 and 1994, the death rate more than tripled from the previous years. In those 2 years, they recorded 102 deaths. Many were elderly, but a troubling fact emerged. Nearly all were improving before their sudden demise. After reviewing all the charts, the nurse could find only one similarity. In a large percentage of the deaths, one particular nurse was on duty. The data suggested a chilling scenario. She took the information to the hospital administrator, hoping she'd overlooked something that could explain away her suspicions. But the numbers didn't lie. They had to face the possibility that a member of the hospital staff might be a killer. Patients at a small Indiana hospital were dying at an alarming rate. and it looked like their deaths were no accident.
Just check the heart one more time.
The awful realization climbed up the chain of command at the county hospital. They called Indiana State Police investigator Frank Turchi.
Detective Turchi. In March of 1995, I was contacted by the chief of police in Clinton, who had been contacted by the hospital attorney. Before we had our first meeting, we had talked to each other about what it could possibly be, and obviously your first thought is theft of drugs, something like that. You don't think of a murder investigation. That was probably the last thing on our mind.
Investigators met with the hospital administrators. They told him the accusation centered on one nurse named Orville Lynn Majors.
All indications are...
At the time, all the hospital staff had to go on were their suspicions.
I'm not sure what it means exactly.
Since they had no proof of murder, they couldn't even give Turchi the name of a single victim.
In a normal investigation, you want to try to find out who did it. Like it's a whodunit type thing. But in this case, it was totally in reverse. I felt like we had a very good suspect, but we had to figure out who he killed and how he killed them.
Turchi requested a meeting with the nurse, Orville Lynn Majors. He wanted to talk with him before the hospital tipped him off he was under investigation. Turchi was too late.
They had suspended him, and that he had already had a lawyer contact them, so we knew that it was going to be very difficult. That was probably the first stumbling point in the investigation.
The next stumbling point was the mountains of technical data Turchi and his colleagues had to collate. If hospital patients were being murdered, then the proof was buried somewhere in this mountain of records.
There were shorthand type nurses' notes that meant something to them. To us, it meant absolutely nothing. So we had to be totally educated on medical terminology and deciphering medical records.
At this crucial preliminary phase of the investigation, every detail mattered, whether it pertained to Orville Lynn Majors or not.
He was either going to be a suspect or he wasn't. But at the beginning, he looked like a pretty good suspect. But we wanted to be very open-minded with that, and I wanted to. It was very important to me that we eliminate any possibility other than him.
Word of the investigation leaked to the media. Turchi feared the publicity would hurt the investigation. But the angel of death stories offered a mixed blessing.
It made people aware that something had happened, possibly, and these people began contacting all their local law enforcement agencies saying, you know, when my wife or mother or husband, grandmother, whoever it was, died in that intensive care unit, we saw something that at the time we thought looked odd, maybe suspicious, but the last thing you think of is that nurse caring for your family member is killing them. Okay, so we talked a little bit on the phone.
Turchi followed up on the messages he received from people who had lost loved ones at the hospital. A woman recalled Nurse Orville Majors injecting something into her mother's IV immediately before she died.
Before it was her medication.
The woman's death fit the pattern. The patient's health was improving up until the point she suffered cardiac arrest.
He started to leave the room.
Over and over again, investigators kept hearing similar stories of mysterious injections with fatal results.
That's what got the case off and running, full speed, and at that point in time, we knew as investigators we had a real serious problem going on, and most likely a homicide investigation.
The case seemed to be growing larger each day. Turchi developed a database to organize the massive amount of information he collected. To prove Orville Majors was killing people, he first had to prove the alleged victims had died unnatural deaths. For the investigation to succeed, he had to determine the most likely victims of foul play. To help decipher the medical records, Turchi assembled a team of specialists, including Dr. Michael Ollinger, an expert in emergency medical care. He compared the suspicious deaths against the records of patients who died under less questionable circumstances. The suspicious deaths stood out. In each case, death suddenly struck a recovering patient.
We were, in fact, becoming medical detectives. We were looking at these cases, trying to determine, was this a unnatural or unexpected type of an event?
Investigators continued their fact-finding. They sought to gather all they could about Orville Majors and any other potential suspects.
So we interviewed nurses, doctors, healthcare people from every facet of the hospital, nutritionists, janitorial people, anyone that could have gotten in that intensive care unit, and either look at them as possible suspects or totally eliminate them.
But it always came back to Majors. One nurse reported seeing him inject a patient who died almost instantly. Dr. Ollinger instructed the investigators to chart the deaths based on their level of suspicion. They needed to link Majors to each death. Turchi took the most suspicious cases to Special Deputy Prosecutor Greg Carter. Carter remained unconvinced.
I know there are a lot of variables at work there, and that in order to charge and convict someone of a criminal act, you have to prove them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So the associations or patterns in and of themselves didn't really cause me to leap to any conclusions. That's a real problem. I mean, this hospital had virtually no record keeping.
In order to bring criminal charges against Orville Lynn Majors, the prosecutor required some forensic proof of poisoning.
We knew that if we could find a toxin in the autopsy, that would be a very huge step in coming up with a smoking gun, but that in itself wouldn't necessarily be the smoking gun. We knew that we had to somehow link that toxin to our suspect.
What do you know anything else? Do you know any
First things first. Turchi had to find the toxin, and that meant exhumation. Turchi began the delicate job of asking survivors for permission to dig up their loved ones for autopsy.
We should say that we're going to have to exhume her body and do an autopsy.
If the evidence existed, it was buried with the victims.
We will stay in contact. It was a very difficult time for them, obviously, and for us also. I think that the families that the investigators dealt with knew that they were doing the very best they could to try to solve this case and find out why their family member died.
Finally, the autopsies commenced. The medical examiner looked for a variety of toxins and found absolutely nothing.
When they did the first 2 or 3 autopsies and they never came up with an obvious cause of death or a toxin, we were disappointed. Then it became apparent to us that it was unusual in the fact that they were finding no obvious cause of death.
It was a new way to think about the case. The fact that nothing suspicious was found provided grounds for suspicion. In fact, it could be their biggest clue so far. Dr. Ollinger examined the EKG readings from the deceased patients to find a common pattern.
The pattern that we recognized was many of these patients that died, they would die from a sudden loss of heart activity. Their heart would be beating fine, and all of a sudden, over a matter of less than a minute, they would get a widening of their heart rhythm and then just flatline.
Dr. Ollinger reasoned whatever substance caused patients to die like that must also occur naturally in the body. That is why it wouldn't stand out in the autopsy. It would let the killer pass unnoticed. It would be the perfect poison. In Indiana, hospital patients were dying mysteriously. Investigators suspected poison. The medical investigators researched toxins that would kill quickly and leave no trace. Dr. Michael Ollinger knew of a compound that would work like that: potassium chloride.
Potassium chloride could kill a healthy person, and so it wasn't unexpected that if potassium chloride was given to these patients, it would result in the types of deaths that we were seeing, which was a sudden loss of electrical activity of the heart.
To test his theory and build the case, Ollinger suggested investigator Turchi bring a toxicologist and a heart specialist aboard. He brought in medical toxicologist Dr. Brent Furby to lend his expertise. Because potassium is present in healthy bodies, if it's used as a poison, it would be difficult to prove.
When people die, within a few hours, usually their potassium goes up considerably. It may even triple. So determining that someone has been injected with potassium in a patient post-mortem, particularly if they've been exhumed, is really, really tough. In fact, I think it's virtually impossible.
The healthy heart uses potassium to control its rhythm. Too much potassium overwhelms the organ, causing it simply to stop. And though the presence of post-mortem potassium would prove nothing, a victim of potassium poisoning would show telltale signs of the toxin. Cardiologist Eric Pristowski was brought in to look for them.
Potassium is sort of the kingpin of the cell membrane. Potassium in the right concentration allows normal flow of electricity in a cell. If you suddenly give a very large amount of potassium that gets to the heart very quickly, what you do is you affect the heart's membrane so they cannot have electricity flow. And when that happens, the heart stops.
Do you carry this drug?
Not only is potassium stealthy,
Yes.
it was also easy to obtain.
Yes.
Detectives found that a nurse could take a vial of potassium chloride from the hospital supply without anyone noticing it missing.
This is where you keep the
A
drug.
vial of potassium chloride would provide the smoking gun investigator Frank Turchi desperately needed.
I obviously wanted a search warrant early for Lynn Major's property, and we just couldn't put it all together. The information we had received that would give us suspicion as to what he was doing was events that had happened 2 years prior to our investigation. So obviously it didn't allow us the time frame in order to get a search warrant.
Turchi tried to question Majors, but his lawyer would not allow his client to provide specific answers.
Thank you.
The case was in danger of stalling. Greg Carter and Frank Turchi needed stronger evidence to get search warrants for Major's home.
Presence of a substance which might.
I understand that you and Lynn are roommates, is that correct?
They contacted
yes.
Major's housemate.
He moved into my house and...
At first, he was suspicious and reluctant to talk with authorities.
As to Lynn's
But eventually,
involvement?
they won his trust. He owned the house that he and Majors lived in. He told investigators that one day, as he was straightening up the garage, he came across some vials of potassium chloride. Here, at last, was the elusive smoking gun.
Would be willing to sign that?
The housemate gave police permission to search his home.
This is one that we've prepared.
More vials were found on the premises. One thing led to another, and the discovery enabled investigators to get a warrant to search Major's van. More vials turned up. They were processed as evidence.
Frank?
Now that they had linked Majors to potassium chloride, they had to rule out any other possible causes of death. Many of the patients died of heart disease. But now that poisoning was suspected, cardiologist Bruce Waller was called in to autopsy the hearts to find evidence of that disease.
I would look for blockages in the arteries, look to see if there has been heart attack,
and examine the remaining valves and other aspects of the heart. If the heart were completely normal, then we would be suspicious of some other toxin as the cause of death.
The hearts were healthy. The suspicions were confirmed. Investigators had gathered enough evidence to arrest Orville Lynn Majors on suspicion of murder.
The evidence concluded that Lynn Majors was taking a patient in the intensive care unit, developing the opportunity for him to be alone with that patient, injecting the potassium chloride into the patient, causing their death, and doing it to make it look medically like this person took a turn for the worse and died.
The investigation took nearly 4 years, but in the end, it paid off. Orville Lynn Majors was convicted and sentenced to 360 years in prison. There is no deceit colder than a trust that is betrayed. When that betrayal turns deadly, police turn to forensic science to avenge the victims of broken trust.